Welcome back, everyone, to OpenLine. We are talking politics, talking notable congressional hearings throughout history. And certainly the January 6 hearings are coming up again this week, Thursday night, in prime time. Those hearings will be taking place. We have with us Dr. Marc Schwerdt. He is Associate Professor, Chair of History, Politics, and Philosophy at Lipscomb. And I was very interested in the conversation in the first segment here, and we'll go back to that, but I want to take a call. Let's go to Mary Helen. Hello, Mary Helen.
Well, hey, y'all. Well, I've got a comment and a question for you, Professor. My comment is I'm an independent, and I don't believe in a third party. I don't believe in an independent party. I'm just an independent. And I've been a registered Republican, but I am an independent. And I believe in the two-party system because our system is set up. It used to be set up like with the two-thirds majority. Now it's down to a 50-50 vote, and now a third party can come in like Ralph Nader did back in 2000 and then be used and abused, and Bernie Sanders back in, 2008 or 2016, I can't remember now, and manipulate and split the vote. And then the people get pissed off because they didn't get what they wanted. But our system is set up like that. It's set up with the Lords and the Commons, just like in England. And the people's people, the House of Representatives, we get our people in there, but we can't seem to get it past the Senate anymore, although we'll have a majority of what the people want in the House of Representatives. And I think that's because people are screwing with the system. But anyway, I just wanted to say that. And Professor, I have a question for you. Y'all were talking about Iran-Contra earlier. I remember that very vividly, and I watched Watergate, and I watched several things in my lifetime on TV that have to do with hearings and whatnot. But what I gathered from Iran-Contra is that it finally showed, Nixon was showing some of how creepy it is with what Hunt was getting ready to pull off. He was going to put contracts out on people, and I think that's why he stepped down. That's my opinion. But Iran-Contra basically showed us, to me, how our government could lose control and let a paramilitary type of operation run a shadow parallel government to our Constitution. And that's what pissed me off. I got tired of hearing, Oliver North was taking orders. Well, he was getting money, too, so we don't know all what really went down. Now, Professor, I've gone through several textbooks in the past 25 years, college textbooks at used bookstores, and all I can find on Iran-Contra is about a paragraph. I would like to know, how do you teach Iran-Contra? How long do you spend on Iran-Contra? Because to me, that was a very important thing, because we were selling arms that were against the law in this country to sell military weapons, pay for the taxpayers for R&D, and likewise military weapons to any other country. We weren't supposed to be doing that. That's a starter. So I'm going to hang up, and I want you to tell me, what do you teach on Iran-Contra?
Mary Helen is like me. She watched Iran-Contra, and she's taken it to the next level. She's now asking, what do you teach about Iran-Contra? That's very interesting. Okay, what about that?
Well, I teach Iran-Contra from two different perspectives. One is, if you're talking about the relationship between presidency and Congress, then you talk about that conflict. You talk about how, in their constitutional roles, what is legitimate for the president to do, what is legitimate for the executive branch to do, and then, of course, what is Congress's role in terms of oversight, but also in the making of foreign policy. And that's kind of a really difficult question to really answer in any significant, continuous way, because the Constitution says so little about the role of Congress in foreign policy. And so therefore, it's given the president a lot of leeway in making foreign policy because he is commander-in-chief. He is the one who is in charge of the executive branch. The Secretary of State reports to him, Secretary of Defense reports to him, and so forth and so on. So it is sort of the consensus, I think, that if you're looking at how you teach Iran-Contra, it is a scandal. It is certainly an example, just like she said, that you can have this sort of independent rogue is a charged term, but I think it's legitimate. Of this kind of policy can take place when it failed in open debate within the Congress. You had a Republican president who wasn't going to get a Democratic House and Senate to support his foreign policy initiative by going into sending arms and supplies and things like that to the Contras in Nicaragua, and he found another way to do it. His administration found another way to do it. And I think that basically says the hearings were effective, that they were needed, and they were a lesson to those who would want to create one of those rogue kinds of situations. I also teach that case study in my American Foreign Policy course when I do teach it. And there, it sort of serves the same purpose, but you look at it from a different angle. You look at it from the sense of, okay, was this a necessary thing to do? Can domestic politics inhibit the ability to keep the country safe? Okay, and that would have been the argument used by people like Oliver North, like the others who were involved in it. And those two things are always in tension. It's just like our, very heavy debates about security versus freedom kinds of conversations. This would have been, we can't let domestic politics, concerns about how much money we're spending or something like that, influence our ability to keep the country safe from our enemies. And I think it's pretty obvious that the Reagan administration lost that debate, not only in the public, but also in the aftermath of that, of those hearings. So if I'm going to talk about it, I'll usually spend like a day on it. Which is a complete hour, which translates into quite a bit of class time when you're only talking about the significance of one event on a particular subject.
Well, that's good. I agree I believe that Mary Helen would have combed through history books looking for this. Yeah. And now she's saying she can only find a paragraph. And I was worried at that moment.
That's probably typical.
Yeah.
If she's looking at something like a basic American government textbook, not to get off topic either, but if she's looking at a basic American textbook, there's probably one chapter on foreign policy, and it's got to cover everything from Washington all the way through a President Obama, a President Trump, depending on how recent the book is. So one paragraph sounds about right. Even if
one paragraph, but I'm glad you spent a whole class on it, because I was worried for a moment we've talked about it more on OpenLine than you would talk about it in a college class, but that's not the case.
Yeah. Well, you've got to tell kids about these things.
Yeah. Yeah.
You really need to, give them the context as well as going through the actual everything else about it.
Now, she also said can't get things past the Senate, and that has been kind of an area where we are now. And so again, you have so many hats, history, politics, and philosophy. We'll get into philosophy soon, but history and politics, is it how unusual is this time in history where things don't get past the Senate? Is the Senate designed that way, or are we at this point where people feel like nothing's going to ever pass when you need the 60 supermajority or whatever it is? What about that?
Yeah, so this idea of the filibuster being able to stop any sort of legislation, of course, goes back to the original setting up of the Senate. And the Senate has become a lot more what we call small d democratized since it was made into direct elections. Remember, under the original formulation of the Constitution, the Senate was elected by state legislatures, okay, instead of by the voters. That changed in 1913. And so since then, the Senate has been elected the same way as Congress. It's just that they have longer terms and they're elected by an entire state as opposed to a district. Okay, so that changes the way they behave, but they become a lot more like the House than they used to be. So the Senate has this tradition, and that's truly what it is. I mean, it's written into their rules and everything like that, but they have the ability to change it, of unlimited debate. This is where the tradition of the filibuster comes from. If someone takes the podium and wants to hold forth for a long time to stop all business, because as long as someone's talking, no other business can take place. That's what the function of it is. You know, we got a couple of famous episodes where individuals would get up and do sometimes inspiring speeches, sometimes very kind of like petty things, like read from a book or something like that, in order to, you know, delay something that they didn't want to happen. Nowadays, it's only really the threat of a filibuster. Hardly anybody actually goes through with it. So when an individual senator says, I'm going to do this, I want time to speak, and I'm not going to yield until I get my way, which is usually the defeat of something, that usually is sufficient because the Senate wants to move things through. So it's more of almost like a blackmail than it is anything else. If you don't do what I want, then I'm going to do this. Maybe extortion is a little bit more accurate term. But in what that has done is it's lowered the threshold for how much a senator has to commit to doing a filibuster. And so that's really been your thing here. It's what's halted things and given the impression that nothing gets done.
We need to call their bluff and make them speak for hour after hour.
Yeah, the thing is, you've got such an evenly divided Senate that all it takes is one defection from your own party to make that happen. And so, you know, the major debate the last few years, at least the major episode of filibustering, has been that the Republicans were able to carve out, or excuse me, the Democrats were able to carve out an exception to filibusters with judicial nominations. And that allowed them to say, okay, well, all you need is 50 votes to get cloture, which is that actual closing of debate, which is that 60 vote threshold. Well, for judicial nominations, that's been brought down to 50. So you just need a simple majority to do it. So if you're the majority, regardless of if you're 51 or even 50, and you've got that, maybe you've got the vice presidential slot that can be the tiebreaker, you can just move those nominations through. And that's what Trump administration did, and that's what the Biden administration has been able to do to some extent.
Interesting. That's all. That's very interesting. All right, we have to take a break. I want to come back. Well, we'll continue this discussion. Really, notable congressional hearings. We've talked about Iran-Contra. What are your thoughts? Also, January 6th, if you have thoughts about that. We'll take a break. Come back. Continue our discussion right after this.